The Nexus Arena floated in the void like a crystalline tumor, its bioluminescent walls pulsing with the collective heartbeats of 47 different species. Because apparently when you've mastered faster-than-light travel and can reshape matter at the molecular level, the most sophisticated way to settle diplomatic disputes is still to watch big things hit other big things until one stops moving. Welcome to galactic civilization, folk. 10,000 years of evolution, and we're still just cave dwellers with better lighting. The arena itself was a marvel of engineering, a 3-kilometer sphere of transparent aluminum suspended between twin neutron stars, powered by the gravitational dance of cosmic death. Inside, artificial gravity generators created fighting platforms that could simulate any environment, from the crushing depths of gas giant atmospheres to the vacuum of deep space. The whole thing was designed to showcase the noble art of champion combat, which was a fancy way of saying sanctioned violence for political gain. The galactic hegemony had held dominance in these arenas for the better part of 3 centuries, and their secret weapon wasn't particularly secret. It was 12 feet tall, weighed approximately 2 tons, and looked like someone had crossbred a Tyrannosaurus Rex with a particularly angry mountain. The Thakran were nature's answer to the question, what if we made killing machines, but big? Their current champion designation, Gorthul the Bone Crusher, because subtlety was apparently not a Thakran virtue, had an undefeated record spanning 47 matches. 47 different species had sent their finest warriors to face him. 47 different species had collected their finest warriors in buckets afterward. The statistics were grimly impressive. Average match duration 4 minutes, 37 seconds. Longest match 11 minutes, 12 seconds. A personal best that occurred only because Gorthul had apparently enjoyed playing with his food that day. The hegemony's propaganda department had turned these numbers into a marketing campaign. Resistance is futile was passé. Resistance is brief had a much nicer ring to it. Today's challenger represented the newest addition to the galactic community, a species so recently discovered that half the arena's spectators had to check their datapads to remember what they were called. Earth. Humans. The third rock from an unremarkable yellow star in the unfashionable end of the Orion spiral arm. The preliminary reports had been underwhelming. Humans averaged 1.7 meters in height and weighed roughly 7. They had no natural armor, no venomous fangs, no electromagnetic discharge capabilities. Their bones weren't even properly reinforced with metallic compound. They were, by every measurable standard, the most pathetically under-evolved sentient species anyone had encountered since the Great Survey began. Even their planet was laughably average. Standard gravity, standard atmosphere, standard temperature range. No crushing atmospheric pressure to build strength, no toxic environment to foster adaptation, no predators worth mentioning. Earth was basically a cosmic nursery, soft, safe and perfectly designed to produce the galactic equivalent of house cat. The betting pools reflected this reality with ruthless mathematical precision. Gorthul was favored at odds of 84 to 1. The smart money wasn't even betting on whether the human would lose, but on how many pieces they'd find him in afterward. Ambassador Veltar of the Centaurian Trade Federation adjusted his 6-eyed viewing apparatus and chuckled, a sound like grinding metal. "I almost feel sorry for them," he transmitted to his aide, sending a representative to certain death just to maintain diplomatic face. "It's positive. What's the human word? Tragic. Perhaps they don't understand the nature of champion combat," his aide suggested diplomatically. "Oh, they understand perfectly. Their diplomatic corps spent 6 months reviewing arena footage and statistical analysis. They know exactly what they're walking into." Veltar's mandibles clicked in amusement, which makes it either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. In my experience, those two things are often indistinguishable. The arena's central platform began its transformation, gravity generators humming to life as they configured the fighting space for optimal viewing. Standard Earth normal conditions, 1g gravity, 21% oxygen atmosphere, temperature maintained at a comfortable 20 degrees Celsius. The hegemony could have demanded harsher conditions. Their champion was adapted for environments that would liquefy most carbon-based life forms, but they'd learned that victory was sweeter when achieved on equal terms. It sent a better message. Through the arena's primary viewport, a transport vessel approached, sleek, efficient, and disappointingly small. Human engineering apparently favored function over intimidation. The ship looked like it could barely carry a decent-sized snack, let alone a champion worthy of the Nexus arena. Attention spectators, the arena's AI announced in 47 different languages simultaneously. The human representative has arrived. Prepare for, well, let's just call it an educational experience. Even the arena's artificial intelligence had developed a sense of irony. That probably should have been someone's first clue that this whole situation was about to become significantly more interesting than anyone expected. But across 47 different species, in 47 different languages, the same thought echoed through the collective consciousness of the arena's spectators. This was going to be over embarrassingly quickly. The docking bay iris dilated, and something stepped out of the human trance. Every conversation in the arena stopped. Not because of awe, or fear, or even respect, because of laughter. The sound started small, a few snickers from the vegan delegation, a chortling wheeze from the Silicon Lords. But laughter, as any xenobiologist will tell you, is remarkably universal. Within seconds, the entire arena was shaking with mirth. 47 different species, with 47 different concepts of humor, had found something they could all agree was absolutely hilarious. The human champion stood exactly 1.6 meters tall, on a good day, with boots on. The laughter echoed through the arena's crystalline halls like a cosmic joke that had finally found its punchline. 47 species, representing the pinnacle of galactic civilization, reduced to giggling schoolchildren at the sight of Earth's champion. It was, the arena's sociologists would later note, the first truly unifying moment in recorded galactic history. The human designation Champion Prime, according to the utterly optimistic Earth diplomatic files, stood in the docking bay with the kind of stillness that suggested either deep meditation or mild confusion about how they'd ended up in this particular circle of hell. The betting algorithms immediately recalculated. Previous odds of 80-47 to 1 were adjusted to 1,047 to 1, then 1,500 to 1. Then the system gave up and simply displayed inevitable in 47 languages. Ambassador Veltar wiped moisture from his optical sensor. I haven't laughed this hard since the Plutonians tried to declare war with their mining equipment, he wheezed to his aide. Look at it, it's barely larger than my waste disposal unit. The arena's analysis systems, however, were having a field day. Biometric scanners swept over the human challenger, and the results were immediately broadcast to VIP viewing boxes across the facility. The data was, well, calling it underwhelming would be like calling a supernova mildly warm. Height 1.63 meters. Bone density, laughably standard. Muscle mass adequate for lifting moderately heavy boxes, probably. The scanner's threat assessment algorithm tried to calculate a danger rating, experienced what could only be described as an electronic aneurysm, and settled on displaying a single question mark. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary lifeforms, announced the arena's master of ceremonies, a floating crystal entity that had apparently evolved specifically for sports commentary. We present Earth's champion, a being so magnificently that our measurement systems initially mistook them for a large household pet. More laughter. The hegemony's diplomatic box was practically vibrating with mirth. General Thakmor, supreme military commander and Gorthal's personal trainer, was making sounds that registered on seismic monitors 3-star systems away. Should we even bother with the pre-combat analysis? Thakmor rumbled to his staff. My champion's breakfast this morning was larger than their entire warrior. But the arena's protocols were protocols and bureaucracy was apparently universal. The human was escorted to the preparation chambers, while massive holographic displays began broadcasting their champion profile to the bloodthirsty masses. Species, Homo sapiens. Home planet, Earth. Terra. Locally designate, evolutionary advantages, opposable thumbs, pattern recognition, questionable decision-making abilities, natural weapons, none detected. Armor plating, what armor plating? Special abilities, unconfirmed, possibly non-existent. The psychological profile was even more amusing. According to Earth's diplomatic files, humans were adaptable problem solvers with remarkable persistence. The arena's xenopsychologists had translated this as, they're too stupid to know when to quit, which was apparently considered a survival trait on their pathetic little world. Remarkable persistence, chuckled Dr. Zelnaya. the arena's chief medical officer, reviewing the human's genetic markers. Yes, I suppose cockroaches show remarkable persistence too, right up until you step on them. The pre-combat medical examination revealed more delightful inadequacies. The human's cardiovascular system was designed for standard atmospheric pressure, no adaptations for high-stress combat environments. Their nervous system showed normal reaction times, nothing approaching the lightning-fast reflexes of proper predator species. Even their immune system was embarrassingly average, clearly evolved to handle the gentle pathogens of their garden world paradise. I'm genuinely curious, transmitted Veltar to the arena's information network. What could Earth's leaders possibly have been thinking? This isn't champion combat, it's assisted suicide with better lighting. The answer, according to the leaked diplomatic communications that were already circulating through the arena's gossip networks, was both simpler and more pathetic than anyone had imagined. Earth's government had literally held a lottery, not a carefully designed selection process, not a competition among their finest warriors, an actual random lottery among volunteers. Because apparently when faced with the choice between sending their best and potentially losing them, or sending someone expendable and definitely losing them, humanity had chosen the path of maximum democracy and minimum intelligence. The volunteer in question, whose personal files were now being dissected by every intelligence service in the arena, was a perfectly ordinary human. No military background, no special training, no genetic modifications or cybernetic enhancement. They'd spent their adult life in what Earth classified as civil engineering, which was apparently a fancy term for making things that don't fall down. Civil engineering, mused General Thakmore, reviewing the data. On a world with standard gravity and no significant seismic activity, what could they possibly engineer? Decorative bridges, aesthetically pleasing drainage systems. The combat preparation phase was traditionally when champions would demonstrate their pre-fight rituals, psyching themselves up for battle with displays of strength, speed, or tactical acumen. The arena's cameras focused expectantly on the human preparation chamber. The human sat quietly, appeared to be reading something, a small device, probably containing tactical information about their opponent. The crowd waited for the traditional pre-combat display, the roar of challenge, the demonstration of devastating techniques, the ritualistic destruction of practice targets. Instead, the human appeared to be taking notes. "Are they studying?" asked the master of ceremonies, its crystalline form flickering with confusion. During combat preparation, what could they possibly be studying that would help them survive the next 4 minutes? The answer became apparent when the arena's surveillance systems picked up audio from the preparation chamber. The human was muttering to themselves, apparently a species trait involving verbal processing of complex information. "Okay, so the big guy's got a reach advantage. Yeah, about 3 meters. Standard bipedal locomotion, so the knee joints are probably the weak point. Weight distribution looks front-heavy, which means, yeah, balance issues if you can get behind the center of mass. Muscle groups are obviously optimized for straight-line power delivery, so lateral movement should be." The arena fell silent, not the expectant silence of a crowd waiting for violence, but the confused silence of 47 species, trying to process what they'd just heard. The human wasn't preparing for glorious combat, they were preparing for engineering problem, and they'd apparently decided that Gorthal the Bone Crusher was just a very large, very complex structural challenge that needed to be solved. The arena's probability calculators, already straining under the impossibility of calculating meaningful odds, finally gave up entirely and displayed a single message in every known language. Error. Insufficient data to process stupidity of this magnitude. The arena's central platform had been configured for maximum spectacle, a perfectly circular fighting space, 50 meters in diameter, surrounded by energy barriers that could contain the explosive force of a small nuclear weapon, which, given Gorthal's previous performances, was less precautionary measure and more basic safety protocol. The hegemony champion emerged from his preparation chamber, to the thunderous approval of 47 species who appreciated good old-fashioned ultraviolence. Gorthal the Bone Crusher stood 4 meters tall at the shoulder, his reptilian hide scarred with the ritual markings of countless victories. Each scale was the size of a dinner plate, each claw capable of carving through starship hull plating. His jaw could bite through reinforced titanium, his tail could shatter concrete, and his roar could literally rupture unprotected eardrums at close range. He was, in every measurable sense, a perfect killing machine wrapped in 2 tons of malevolent muscle and prehistoric fury. The crowd's cheering reached levels that required the arena's acoustic dampeners to prevent structural damage. Then the human stepped onto the platform. The cheering stopped, not because of awe or intimidation, but because the contrast was so absurd that most species' brains simply couldn't process it. It was like watching a hummingbird challenge a freight train to single combat. Gothel looked down at his opponent with what might have been confusion, if his species had possessed sufficient neural complexity for such subtle emotions. The massive head tilted slightly, as if trying to determine whether this was some elaborate practical joke or if the arena staff had accidentally released someone's lunch onto the combat platform. "Ladies, gentlemen, and various forms of sentient energy," announced the master of ceremonies, its voice carrying the forced enthusiasm of someone trying to sell a particularly disappointing product. "Let the encounter begin." The opening bell, a harmonic resonance that could be heard across 17 different auditory spectrums, rang out across the arena. Gothel did what came naturally to a creature bred for 4 centuries of gladiatorial dominance. He charged. The ground shook. Seismic monitors registered the impact of each massive foot strike. The energy barriers flickered as they absorbed the kinetic overflow. 47 species held their collective breath, waiting for the inevitable splat. The human did something unprecedented in the history of the Nexus arena. They stepped sideways. It was such a simple movement that most of the crowd missed it entirely. One moment the human was directly in front of the charging behemoth. The next moment they were 3 meters to the left. Gothel's charge carried him straight past his target and into the far energy barrier, which discharged enough force to vaporize a small asteroid. The champion shook his massive head, clearly annoyed by this unexpected development. In 3 centuries of combat, prey had always done the sensible thing. They either charged back and died quickly, or stood frozen in terror and died slightly less quickly. None of them had ever just moved out of the way. "Interesting tactical choice," commented Ambassador Veltar, though his 6 eyes were focused more on the betting displays than the combat, prolonging the inevitable by, perhaps 15 seconds. Gothel turned with surprising speed for something the size of a small building, and charged again, this time angling to compensate for potential lateral movement. The human stepped sideways again. Different direction this time. The crowd began to murmur. This was not how champion combat was supposed to work. There were traditions, protocols, a certain dramatic structure that audiences had come to expect. The challenger was supposed to make some token display of defiance before being systematically dismantled by superior force. They were not supposed to treat the hegemony's perfect killing machine like an especially large and clumsy obstacle to be avoided. "Is the human, are they running away?" asked Dr. Zeleniah, adjusting her scanning equipment. "Because technically that's not against the rules, but it's certainly not in the spirit of Gothel's third charge was more calculated. Instead of a straight-line attack, he swept his massive claws in wide arcs, trying to cover all possible escape routes. It was a technique that had proven devastatingly effective against the quick, agile species that had challenged him in the past. The human did something even more unexpected than stepping sideways. They stepped forward, not toward safety, not toward an exit, but directly into the space that Gothel's massive arms couldn't reach, the small pocket of relative calm that existed directly beneath the champion's center of mass. "What are they doing?" whispered General Tharkmore, his strategic mind struggling to process this completely irrational behavior. "That's the most dangerous possible position." One downward strike, and the human reached up and did something to Gothel's left ankle. It was a tiny movement, barely visible to the crowd, a brief touch, lasting perhaps half a second. Most of the spectators missed it entirely, focused as they were on waiting for the dramatic moment of inevitable destruction. Gothel took another step forward and promptly fell over. 4 meters and 2 tons of apex predator crashed to the arena floor with a sound like a collapsing building. The impact was so massive that it registered on seismic equipment in 3 neighboring star systems. The arena fell silent, not the anticipatory silence of a crowd waiting for violence, but the stunned silence of 47 species, trying to process something that violated several fundamental laws of physics, biology and common sense. "Technical difficulties," announced the master of ceremonies after a moment. Please stand by while we determine what just happened. Gorthal struggled to regain his footing, which should have been a simple matter for a creature with his strength and coordination. Instead he kept slipping, his massive claws unable to find purchase on the arena's perfectly textured surface. Each attempt to rise resulted in another spectacular crash, like watching a mountain repeatedly attempt to learn ballet. The human meanwhile had stepped back to a safe distance, and appeared to be waiting patiently for the show to continue. "Replay," demanded General Thakmor, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having reality conform to his expectations. "Show me what happened." The arena's recording systems obliged, displaying the moment of contact in slow motion, enhanced, and analyzed from 17 different angles. The human's hand had briefly touched a specific point on Gorthal's ankle joint, a spot where several major mechanical systems converged. "They loosened something," breathed the arena's chief engineer, a multi-tentacled being, whose species had evolved specifically for understanding complex mechanical systems. "Impossible. Those joints are biological. You can't just unscrew them, but apparently you could do something." Whatever the human had done, Gorthal's left leg was no longer properly supporting his massive frame. The champion kept trying to charge, kept trying to attack, kept trying to demonstrate the overwhelming superiority that had dominated the arena for 3 centuries. Instead he kept falling over. Each attempt was more spectacular than the last. The crowd watched in fascinated horror, as the most feared champion in galactic history repeatedly face-planted into the arena floor with the grace and dignity of a collapsing skyscraper. "This is impossible," muttered Zelnaya, running full-spectrum medical scans on both combatants. "The human hasn't injured him. All biological systems show normal function." But somehow, the human approached the fallen champion, who was thrashing helplessly like an overturned turtle with anger management issue. Another brief touch, this time to the right ankle. Gorthal's remaining good leg stopped working properly. "They're debugging him," whispered the arena's chief engineer, his voice filled with the kind of awe typically reserved for witnessing divine intervention. "They're treating a living creature like a malfunctioning machine, and systematically identifying the failure points." The crowd watched in stunned silence, as the humans circled their immobilized opponent, occasionally reaching out to touch specific points on the massive body. Each contact resulted in some new malfunction: a wing that wouldn't extend properly, a jaw that kept clicking out of alignment, a tail that seemed to have forgotten how to coordinate with the rest of the nervous system. It was like watching someone disassemble the most dangerous predator in galactic history using nothing but an engineering manual and infinite patience. Finally, the humans stepped back and addressed their opponent directly. "I think that should do it," they said conversationally, as if discussing a particularly challenging home repair project. "You can yield now if you'd like." Gorthal the Bone Crusher, terror of 47 worlds and undefeated champion of the Nexus arena, lay on his back like an overturned beetle and made a sound that was probably supposed to be a roar of defiance, but came out more like a mechanical whimper. The arena's silence stretched into eternity. Then someone, nobody would ever determine who, started clapping. The applause began slowly, uncertainly, like the first drops of rain before a storm. One being, somewhere in the vast crystalline amphitheater, had apparently decided that what they'd witnessed deserved recognition, even if their brain was still 3 steps behind their hands in processing the impossibility of it all. Then another joined in, then another. Within moments the Nexus arena was shaking with the thunderous approval of 47 different species, each expressing appreciation in their own unique way. The Centaurians clapped with their 6-fingered hands, the vegan delegation produced harmonic vibrations that registered as applause on their homeworld, and the Silicon Lords generated crystalline chimes that sounded like wind through metal forest. Even General Thakmor was clapping, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely sure why. The human champion stood in the center of it all, looking mildly surprised by the reaction, as if they'd just fixed a neighbor's leaky faucet and couldn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal about basic plumbing. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted manifestations of cosmic bewilderment," announced the master of ceremonies, its crystalline form flickering with what might have been electronic confusion. "We have a winner." Apparently, the betting systems across the arena had crashed entirely, not from the volume of transactions, but from the fundamental impossibility of calculating payouts on something that should never have been possible.
The odds had been 1,000. The 12 beings who had actually placed money on Earth's champion were about to become the wealthiest entities in 3 spiral arms. Most of them had bet on the human as a joke. Ambassador Veltar was staring at his datapad with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been fed through a matter-antimatter reactor. "This changes everything," he transmitted to his aide, though his voice carried the hollow tone of someone still processing a fundamental shift in reality. "If humans can do whatever that was to our most advanced bio-warrior." The implications were spreading through the arena's diplomatic core like a virus with excellent marketing. Earth, the laughingstock of galactic civilization, had just demonstrated a capability that no one had anticipated, prepared for, or even considered theoretically possible. In the hegemony's VIP box, emergency sessions were already being called. Military advisors were frantically reviewing every piece of intelligence they had on human capabilities, trying to determine if this had been a fluke or a demonstration of something far more terrifying. "Get me everything," General Thakmor growled to his intelligence staff, his eyes never leaving the arena floor where his supposedly invincible champion was still struggling to coordinate basic motor functions. "Every human colony, every ship design, every technological development. If they can do this to Gorthul, what can they do to our battle fleets?" Down on the arena floor, the human was helping their fallen opponents sit upright, a gesture of sportsmanship that would have been touching if it hadn't involved someone barely reaching the chest height of a creature that had been systematically debugged into submission. "You'll be fine in about an hour," the human was explaining conversationally to Gorthul, as if discussing the side effects of a minor medical procedure. "I just disrupted some neural pathway clusters. Think of it as a temporary software glitch. Your autonomic systems will recalibrate and everything should work normally again." Gorthul made a sound that might have been grateful or might have been a death threat. It was hard to tell with Thakran vocal cords, especially when they weren't functioning at full capacity. The arena's medical team had swarmed onto the platform, their scanners working overtime to determine what exactly had been done to their patient. The results were as baffling as everything else about this impossible victory. "No permanent damage," reported Selnaya, her voice carrying the bewildered tone of someone whose medical training had just been rendered obsolete. "All biological systems are intact, but somehow, the neural control pathways have been, I don't even know how to describe it, temporarily reconfigured. It's like someone rewired his nervous system without opening the casing," added the chief engineer, his tentacles writhing with excitement. "This shouldn't be possible with external manipulation, but the human somehow identified specific pressure points that correspond to major neural junctions." He trailed off, apparently realizing that he was describing something that violated several fundamental principles of both biology and engineering. The human, meanwhile, had been escorted to the winner's platform, where they stood looking slightly uncomfortable with the attention. The traditional victory ceremony called for speeches, declarations of superiority, and ritualistic displays of dominance over the defeated opponent. Instead, the human appeared to be taking notes again. "Fascinating," they murmured, apparently addressing their datapad rather than the crowd. "The Thakran nervous system is actually remarkably similar to standard hydraulic control systems. Same basic principles, pressure differentials, feedback loops, redundant pathways. You just have to find the right access points and apply pressure in the correct sequence to disrupt the control algorithms." The crowd fell silent again, not from awe this time, but from the gradual realization that they had been thinking about this entire situation completely wrong. The human hadn't defeated Gorthul through superior strength, speed or combat prowess. They had analyzed him as an engineering problem, identified his operational parameters, and then systematically introduced controlled failures into his biological systems, until he could no longer function as designed. It was the most casually terrifying thing anyone in the arena had ever witnessed. "Questions for the victor," called the master of ceremonies, following traditional post-combat protocols, despite the decidedly non-traditional nature of everything that had just occurred. A forest of hands, tentacles, and various appendages shot up across the arena. "How did you know where to apply pressure?" called out Ambassador Veltar, his voice carrying the desperate edge of someone trying to understand a potential threat to galactic stability. The human considered the question with the same thoughtful expression they'd been wearing throughout this entire ordeal. "Well, all biological systems follow basic engineering principles: structural load distribution, hydraulic pressure management, electrical signal routing. Once you understand the underlying architecture, it's just a matter of identifying the critical failure points and introducing controlled system errors. More silence, the kind of silence that follows the realization that your entire species has been thinking about warfare completely wrong. Are all humans capable of this? Asked General Thakmore, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Oh, this, the human gestured dismissively toward the still recovering Gothul. This is just basic troubleshoot. Any first-year engineering student could have done the same thing, given enough time to study the problem. The betting systems, which had been attempting to restart, crashed again. Across the arena, diplomatic pouches were being frantically prepared for immediate trade agreements were being reconsidered, military assessments were being completely rewritten, and more than one species was quietly beginning to recalculate their position regarding Earth's membership in the galactic community. Because if basic troubleshooting could dismantle the most feared champion in 3 centuries of arena combat, the question wasn't what humans could do to their enemies, the question was what they'd been quietly doing to everything else. And in 47 different languages, across 47 different species, the same thought echoed through the collective consciousness of galactic civilization. Maybe too small to matter had been the most dangerous miscalculation in recorded history. After all, the smallest components often controlled the largest systems, and humans, it seemed, had an excellent understanding of how things were supposed to work, which meant they probably had an even better understanding of how to make them stop working entirely.